Hi everyone, this is Annie McShiras. We're coming in live here for the divestment, what can we do to move our money now? We're so excited that you all are here. Thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, my video's off because we've had some bandwidth issues, but I'm just moderating, so I'm hoping that all the tech issues have been resolved now, and thank you so much for your patience. Just to introduce myself, again, my name is Annie McShiras. I'm with Self-Help Federal Credit Union, which is a community development credit union based in North Carolina, California, Chicago, and Florida. And I also wear another hat as a member of the Dome Huichin Coalition here in Oakland, California. And we're a group of folks that organize to try to change the way our city of Oakland is investing its money and banking relationships. Right now it banks with Chase, and we're trying to move it to bank with more responsible local community banks and credit unions. So again, today we're talking about divestment. What can we do to move our money now? And we're honored to be joined by a few amazing organizers here in the Bay Area who are leading campaigns to move municipal, nonprofit, and individual dollars out of extractive Wall Street banks and into communities serving financial institutions. Our hope is that you'll walk away from this webinar with concrete knowledge and next steps that you need to move your own money and compel your institutions like nonprofits and that you're affiliated with and cities that you live in to move their money as well. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our first speaker today, Jackie Fielder. Jackie Fielder is Minokoju Lakota and Mandan Hidasta, and she's an organizer with Mazaska Talks and founder of the San Francisco DeFundDAPL Coalition. Jackie earned her BA in public policy and a master's degree in sociology from Stanford in 2016. So Jackie, take it away, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you, everyone, for joining this call. This is our this is our third day of the 3 days of action that is under the hashtag Divest the Globe. And on these days, we are asking people to go to their local bank branch, go to their city council, and ask for the ending of the pipelines and really any desecration projects. At this time, the Equator Principles Association is meeting in Brazil. It's an association of 92 banks that are looking at Indigenous people's right to free, prior, and informed consent, and they are supposed to uphold internationally recognized standards around climate change mitigation, but this is not happening. So we're asking people to divest, and we're asking cities, institutions, civil society groups to withdraw their money from Wall Street altogether. This is really important for people to know that it doesn't take a huge organization to make things happen. And that's why we're having this call today. I want to talk about specifically how to start a municipal divestment campaign and how it fits into the larger strategy for divestment. So we know that divestment is working in respect to the energy transfer family of companies and other companies that are building pipelines. Mazaska Talks is focused on 3 pipelines at this point, one of which, another one was just killed, and it's called Energy East Pipeline. Right now we're focused on ending Trans Mountain, Line 3, and Keystone XL. If you look on our website at the Banks tab, you can see all the banks behind these companies that are building these 3 pipelines. In addition to the Dakota Access Pipeline, it's many of the same actors. At this point, BNP Paribas just showed all of the Wall Street banks that it is possible to end financing. They just announced 10 days ago that they would stop financing LNG, fracking, tar sands, and Arctic drilling, and more. This is huge. It's certainly not the ideal, but it is huge for this industry. We know divestment is working because Energy Transfer sued Greenpeace, BankTrack, and other organizations that we work with on divestment internationally over the divestment efforts. And we believe it was a strategy to really drain these organizations of resources and capacity in order to push forward the divestment campaign. So that's one example that it's working. Another one is on Monday, when our 3 days of action started, the Norwegian Oil Fund, which is a $1 trillion oil fund, and on average owns about 1.6% of every single company publicly traded in the world, they announced, their ethics council announced that they would be reviewing their relationship with Energy Transfer. And that is huge. They usually don't come out with statements like that and are very quiet about their relationships and investments, and they're very much in the dialogue. So we're really excited to see what happens there. This is not, and that, as well as the announcement from BNP, was a result of sustained, organized, direct action by people, individuals with very little really political power, because in this administration, in this global political economic context, it's really corporations that have sway over our governments. And we are really excited to have just yesterday an individual who was inspired by our actions on Monday told us that she went to her local bank branch and delivered a letter about the tar sands that we had drafted up. And you can find this on our website. I'll go through the resources later. But she went to her local bank branch, and the branch manager took it in and said that he would send it to the higher ups. That's exactly what we're asking people to do. I'm going to run through the 7 actions that people can take just to be a part of this specific campaign. Obviously, you can participate afterwards, but today is kind of your last day to be a part of this specific 3 days of action. So you can take a pledge to divest yourself, and that would link you to the bankonggood.com/Mazaska page, and it will, if you enter your phone, sign you up for ways to help you divest yourself. There's also the Equator Banks Act petition that you can sign, and that's hosted by BankTrack. You can deliver a boycott letter, as I just mentioned, and go to a local bank branch's manager. You can tune in and share the live stream and the media that we've been putting out around the 3 days of action. You can learn how to start a divestment campaign, which I'll go into next. And you can get your organization or business to sign on to the boycott that we have running. The boycott is really a pledge by organizations to divest their clubs or religious or ethical institutions or businesses to get their money out of Wall Street accounts within the next year. So you don't have to do it immediately, but within the next year. I'm going to go over how we even kind of got these campaigns in Seattle and San Francisco off the ground. Since Seattle got theirs off the ground and got their city to move away from Wells Fargo to the tune of $3 billion annually, there have been about a dozen other cities that have participated and had some form of action stepping away from Wall Street. And this includes Los Angeles, Oakland, Alameda, Santa Monica, Twin Cities, New York, Chicago, DC, Tampa Bay, many cities in Colorado. Santa Fe has got a public bank campaign going, and they're probably the furthest along, and many more. So first of all, you have to find out which bank your city uses. You can email or call the city clerk or treasurer or financial manager, whichever it is, and you have a right to know that information. You can ask how much money they entrust to a Wall Street bank. It may be that they split the accounts separately. So for example, I think in San Francisco, our primary bank is Bank of America, but we have some accounts with Citibank or US Bank. And you can check a list that we have linked up there to see if your city's bank is financing pipelines. But if it's not on the list, you can definitely add to it. I'm looking at the Divest Your Community tab on the Mazaska Talks website. That's MAZASKA talks.org. So that's the first step, is just finding out if your city does business with one of these Wall Street banks. They likely do. Second step is finding out who you can count on. It may just be you in my case, in San Francisco, it was just me in the beginning, and throwing up a Facebook page, lobbying, social media, all that by myself with very little experience, just lots of late nights. And once you do find other people to work with, friends, colleagues, whomever, you can divvy up the tasks. So between social media, lobbying, writing legislation, talking with us about ways to get people out there, and then also make politicians feel the heat, you can definitely bring in many people. If possible, it'd be great if you could center communities who are forced to bear the brunt of the destruction caused by fossil fuel extraction. There are, I think Indigenous people in the United States are between 0.8 and 1.6% of the population. So if you're looking for Indigenous people, don't just ask them to show up and drum and pray and all that. We are out there for sure. But if you're not able to find any Indigenous organizations, that's completely fine. You can get in touch with us. Maybe we have connections and we maybe don't. But it's important to reach out to Indigenous communities who are often the canaries in the coal mine when it comes to this stuff, or especially like Flint, Michigan is a good example of environmental racism. So I would say just be conscious of who you're centering and who you're allowing to speak, and all that good stuff. The third step is to find out where you're going to move the money. There are several options. It depends on the size of your city. You can have a small town like Davis who completed their transition and moved away from Wall Street to a smaller bank because they have only a few dozen millions of dollars running through the accounts annually, and a smaller bank can take that on. Whereas if you have a city like San Francisco, that needs a really big bank or a public bank. We're also looking at how to divvy up, kind of how cities have it now, where they divvy up accounts between, let's say, US Bank and Bank of America. We're looking at how to, what's called decoupling the contract and putting it to B Corp banks or credit unions or smaller banks like that, and just divvying up responsibilities. You certainly have to check the laws with your state and your city around safety and all that, but sorry, dog is going crazy. But yeah, we want to make it clear that there are other options when it comes to Wall Street banks, but I would challenge you to find one that doesn't finance pipelines, prisons, firearms, cluster ammunitions, you name it, immigration detention centers. We really want to step away from Wall Street. So going to credit unions, smaller banks, neighborhood banks, and public banks is definitely the way that we're going. About public banks, there are only one bank in existence in the United States that is a public bank. Ironically, it's the Bank of North Dakota. If you've been following the Standing Rock developments, they subsidized the militarization of law enforcement over there for $37 million. So they loaned $37 million to the state of North Dakota to make that happen and supported human rights abuses. We don't want our public bank to do that, and we want to incorporate a decolonized way of distributing resources in our communities. And to that extent, we want our public banks to really focus on placing people and green energy and the environment before profits. And that is a whole nother fight in itself, just getting a public bank that works for those who have been harmed by Wall Street the most. But it's definitely the way that we want to conduct ourselves in this new era. So far, there have been a few cities that have either convened a task force on a public bank or dedicated resources to conducting a feasibility study. Santa Fe had a feasibility study done last year and are now creating a task force to generate a charter and a business plan. San Francisco has legislation to start a public banking task force. Oakland voted in June of this year to dedicate around $75K to a public banking feasibility study. There's a meeting today in Seattle to make sure that happens too. DC has also voted to put a feasibility study in their city's budget. And yeah, so the next step is to figure out if you're going to propose an ordinance or resolution. An ordinance is basically changing city law, and that is much more difficult to do, but it's definitely possible, and that's what Seattle did, as well as Oakland. A resolution, like we did in San Francisco, is non-binding for sure, and is more symbolic. So it's up to you what you want to do. It's definitely, I think, easier to pass a resolution, but may be more beneficial to your city to pass an ordinance. And we have examples of those kinds of legislation on our website. The next step is to find out which politician is your partner. So in the beginning, you may not have any elected officials supporting you, or supporting you in word, but in deed, not actually doing anything about it. I would say don't take no for an answer, because in San Francisco, as even before we showed up in public as the San Francisco DeFundDAPL coalition, we didn't have any, not even the progressive legislators behind us. And so I would just say that you need to, if there's no response, or if there's negative response, I would just say that requires more pressure on social media and in public. We can definitely help you do that. So next step is, and I think the last step, is to decide how to get your message out and pressure politicians. At this point, it's very clear that Facebook and Twitter have been huge tools for social movements. And even locally, I think especially locally, politicians pay attention to that stuff. So creating a Facebook page, not just a group, but a Facebook page where people who are interested can see what you're about, see what you're trying to do. Facebook page allows you to create events, invite people to like your page, and the likes, even though they may be superficial, politicians care about image. And so it's important that they see this is a well-supported organization and that they are gaining traction and popularity amongst the electorate. So you can also use canva.com, which I use a lot of the time, canva.com. It's a free website where you can create flyers and social media posts. It's super easy to use in my view, and can really make your campaign look professional. So the next I would say is holding public events to organize calling campaigns, talking to media to ensure that you absolutely pack out the council hearings, planning a demonstration, dropping a banner, organizing for the public to shut down their accounts with Wall Street banks at the same time is really effective. You can make it creative. Here in Seattle for the Global Days of Action, we had different contingents going around to the bank branches. There was a Lorax contingent. There was an orca whale contingent. There was a contingent with hazmat suits. There's a contingent with 2 people on stilts. It can be as creative as you want. And it takes dedication for sure and time, but I think it's worth it, and it could gain more media traction if you do something like that. That's about all I have. I just want to point people to the Mazaska Talks website, mazaskatalks.org, and I'll pass it on.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I really appreciate your time, and definitely check out mazaskatalks.org for more information and for a list of some of the resources that Jackie had mentioned. Next, I really want to be able to spend some time, and I know a lot of folks came on this call to spend some time learning about how they, as an individual or through nonprofits they're affiliated with, can also divest. Jackie just gave a great rundown of how you can start a municipal campaign. So I'm going to actually hand it over to Emma Gutman-Slater from Beneficial State Foundation. to talk about how you as an individual or you within your nonprofit can think about divesting, and also she'll give some resources of where to look for better banks and credit unions. So Emma is with Beneficial State Foundation, and their mission is to change the banking system for good. The foundation owns a value-based community development bank called Beneficial State Bank, whose mission is to build prosperity in our communities through regenerative, inclusive banking. Emma is inspired by those using finance to achieve social change. Thanks so much, Emma. I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Annie. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today and getting involved in Divest the Globe. And thanks to Mike and Sachi at New Economy Coalition for getting this all set up, and for all your patience in getting started today. So I want to dive a little bit into the banking system and then share some alternatives with you. And I'm going to share my screen here. So just give me 1 second. Okay, so hopefully you can see the screen. Yeah, great. Okay, so I know you're here because you're all fed up with the status quo and the way banks are running things. But I really, really want to underscore how deeply broken the banking system is. These are just some of the kind of latest headlines in a litany of abuses that the banks have been perpetrating. And banking is also really powerful in shaping our society. So when they're bad, they're really, really bad. But when they're good, they can also be really, really, really good. And we'll get to the good stuff in a minute. But I think it's clear to all of you that banks no longer serve us. And we see this with the 35 or so banks that are supporting the Dakota Access Pipeline. And we see it with the egregious consumer abuses that are sort of rolling out slowly from Wells Fargo over the past 2 years. So I just wanted to give a kind of quick snapshot of some of the facts about what banks are funding, and we kind of say they're dragging this train of misery behind them. And so we have to not only clean up this mess, but also look toward a better future with better banking. And basically the gist is that banks have been pushing a lot of what should be private costs onto the public, whether it's through the hundreds of billions of dollars in fossil fuel finance, or through the fact that 1/3 of bank tellers rely on public assistance, while CEOs earn, in the millions, bank CEOs. So the good news is that there is a better way. And at Beneficial State, we call it banking on values. What that basically means is sort of remembering that banks are supposed to serve the community and be stewards of our money, not the other way around. We don't serve the banks. So when we put our deposits in the banks use that money to make loans to other people, to nonprofits, to small businesses, and they should be doing that in local living economies. So the power of our deposits is that we actually have the opportunity to choose what we create through our banking choices. And I want to kind of tell you what some of those alternatives look like, which Jackie started to get at, but I'll go into detail. The first thing is, when you're looking for a bank or for a credit union, is sort of identifying what your values are and then seeing how that bank or credit union lines up with them. So there's a couple different ways that we look at this. And I have listed them up here, and I'll sort of talk through a few of them. The triple bottom line is that's a way of doing business where the business is optimizing for social and environmental outcomes, and not just thinking about the bottom line. So not just trying to churn a profit. And there are banks that actually adhere to a triple bottom line. So they're looking to be financially sustainable, but what they're really looking for is to make a positive impact in their communities. And one of the ways that you can also think about that is this concept of do no harm. So there are a lot of big banks who are actually doing a lot of great lending, but they're also pouring millions and billions of dollars into the fossil fuel industry, for example. So doing really great things with one hand and doing terrible things with the other hand. And so we want to look for institutions that you want to also look for what they're not doing in addition to what they are doing. When I say grounded in communities, that's thinking about, is this bank or credit union making loans directly to people? That's what we call the real economy. So it's actually going into tangible things as opposed to bundling and repackaging loans so that the bank is at a very far distance from the borrower. And that's what we saw during the recession. Products for people and planet, that sometimes might require some research. So a lot of banks will say that they're giving you something for free, quote unquote, but actually there are hidden fees. And so you kind of have to look around to really read the fine print and see what they're doing. A lot of banks actually design their products to profit from a customer's failure. So they're actually making money and they want to make money on that customer not doing well with their financial health. And then the employee practices is a big one too. How are the employees paid? How much is the highest employee paid compared to the lowest paid employee? And we, again, kind of saw that a lot with Wells Fargo. Are there high pressure sales quotas, and are there other stressful demands that are making, bank tellers end up in the hospital? So looking at those kinds of things. And there are actually financial institutions who are trying to do good. So I wanted to run through some of these options, and then at the end I'll share some links, including some of the ones that Jackie already mentioned, so you can actually go out and find some of these in your area. The first one is the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, and that's a consortium of around 50 banks around the world who have a triple bottom line. And there are maybe about 7 or 8 of them in the US. So they're not everywhere, but you're lucky if you have one in your area. The next thing to look for would be B Corp certified banks. Again, those are banks who are trying to use business to do good. And B Corps have to go through a really rigorous social and environmental performance, accountability, and transparency standards to meet that certification. So you can usually look on a bank's website and you can find that cert, or you can go directly to, you can Google search B Corporation and you can search for banks. We talked a little bit about community banks. So there's sort of 2 kinds of community banks. There's like community banks writ large, and then there are community development banks. We encourage folks to look for community development banks because these are banks that have a specific mandate and a focus to make loans to low to moderate income areas. In general, community development banks are smaller. They're sort of based in local economies. They're locally owned. They're independent. And they usually have to have a sort of narrow geographic scope. So they're only lending in the area that, in which they exist. The CDBA is a good place to look for a community development bank that's in your area. It's cdbanks.org. And most of those community development banks have a designation from the Treasury, which is called CDFI. It's a Community Development Financial Institution, and credit unions can hold this certification too. And what that means is these financial institutions have to lend at least 60% of their loan dollars into low to moderate income neighborhoods. So you know that when you're banking with a CDFI, they're contributing to economic development in low to moderate income areas. And then I put up NCIF as well, because if you really want to do a little more research and sort of dig into CDFIs, the NCIF has a tool called the Bank Impact Tool, and they actually will rank mission-oriented CDFIs. So you can look up by your area and see which are the most highly ranked banks and credit unions in your area. And they will also rank minority depository institutions. And those are banks whose ownership is by a minority group or whose board membership is primarily composed of a minority group. And minority group is defined by the FDIC, which is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And that's the entity that insures our deposit money in banks. And then the last one here are credit unions. And with credit unions, kind of look for the same thing as with community banks. There's credit unions writ large, and then there's community development credit unions. And community development credit unions, which we'd also recommend, have an explicit mission to provide responsible banking products to underserved people and promote financial inclusion. So I'm going to give you the link at the end here where you can look up community development credit unions or CDCUs when you're making your making the switch. The actual like brass tacks of moving your money. So of course it starts with choosing where you want to go, doing a little bit of research and feeling comfortable about the bank that you've chosen. And then the steps are sort of outlined here. You can order your new checks and your debit card. You want to make changes to any sort of automatic payments that you already have set up. So that might be direct deposit with your employer, any online bill payments that you have, and then any automatic payments that you're making directly through your bank account. You want to make sure you switch that over to your new account, and then you want to close your old account. Just to make sure that everything is kind of copacetic in your switch, it's best to close the account after you've set up your new account. Part of the intention behind this is also to spread the word and let other people know. So it's extra in a great way if you share out on social media or however you want to share out, and encourage everyone in your networks to also make the switch and sort of make a statement of what you're doing, because that can be really powerful for other people to motivate them too. And all of these steps and details are available on our beneficialestate.com/moveyourmoney site that's up there. We have a Move Your Money toolkit that you can easily scroll through online or download to just remind yourself of what steps you need to take to make the switch. So I just kind of want to echo what Jackie has already said, that this movement to divest from the big banks and to protect Indigenous sovereignty and save the planet for our future and create a better future for everyone is going to take multiple strategies, and moving your money is a critical part of that. So I really encourage you to do that. I know it can be a little bit sticky, but once you have done it, you're going to feel so good. And also encourage you to tell everyone you know to do the same. Because as Jackie already said, we're already seeing change happen, and it's the public pressure on the banks and the actual moving of capital away from the big banks is really making a difference. So thank you so much for even hopping on the phone today to make this happen. I just wanted to share these links with all of you, and we can send them out afterward. But these are some good tools when you actually want to make the switch, and also really great resources on how to find a good bank that's in your area. And the last one that's on there, fossilfreefunds.org, has a really great 401k switch kit. So it outlines all the steps you need to take if you do want to move your 401k, divest from fossil fuels. It tells you how to talk to your 401k manager. So I just wanted to make a quick pitch for that as well, when you're thinking about sort of all of the ways that your money might be actually working against you. It could be in just your checking and savings. It could be in your 401k if you have one. And there's lots of fossil-free mutual funds out there that you can switch to. Yeah, so I think that is everything that I wanted to share, and happy to take any questions, but I'll pass it back over to you, Annie.
Thanks so much, Emma. That was really informative. I also just want to note that we were hoping to have Wilson Riles from the Defenders of Mother Earth Quechin Coalition join us today. Unfortunately, because of the technical issues and difficulties, he wasn't able to make it. But if anyone was interested in particular in hearing about our coalition or having the chance to speak to Wilson, feel free to reach out after this webinar, and we can connect you to him or to the larger coalition that's working here in Oakland to move the city of Oakland out of Chase. But now I think we have about 10 minutes for questions, and I don't think I'm able to see the questions that have come up. So I'm wondering if, Mike, you can help me see them, and so we can start to get them to either Jackie or Emma if people have burning questions. Okay, so he's going to relay some questions. And no one has posted any questions, so please post your questions in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to be able to speak directly to what is burning in all of your hearts and minds. And maybe I can just start with a question for Emma, which is, Emma, can you just describe briefly what the difference might be for a nonprofit looking to divest versus an individual? What are considerations that nonprofits would need to take into account versus an individual moving their money?
Sure. So nonprofits having nonprofits divest and move to a values-based bank or credit union or community development bank is a really powerful strategy, because nonprofits, especially oftentimes foundations, have huge assets that they can move. It is a little bit different because you do have to know sort of who the decision maker is at the organization, and sometimes it's going to be the leadership or sometimes it's going to be the board. But I would say if you work at a nonprofit, and the first thing is to find out who your nonprofit banks with, and then would be to kind of explore what are the other options in your area. And usually it's a conversation with the nonprofit's CFO or whoever handles the financials. If they are not aware of this movement, I think the first step is to introduce them to this movement and sort of make your arguments. And there's such a wealth of resources out there that can help you sort of provide the background that you need on why you care about this issue. And then, yeah, so I think that is the first step. And it's also helpful to see, for example, who, people like to look at kind of first movers and who else is doing this work. And the Mazaska Talks website has a great list of nonprofits who've signed on to boycott banks that are invested in fossil fuels. So sometimes it's helpful to kind of show who those, and some of them are well-known organizations, show who they are to sort of help you make the push. And then when it actually comes down to making the move, it depends again on the size of the nonprofit. Some larger ones may have a lot of different kinds of accounting needs. Some smaller ones, it may be moving one deposit account or something like that. But with the larger ones, and even with the smaller ones, I would just say that you don't have to divest all at once if that sort of feels overwhelming. You can do it in increments. So you might go to a better bank and set up your account and move a little bit of your money. Maybe it's 10%. And then the next year you're going to move another 10% or something like that. It doesn't all need to be at once. This can be a process, especially for organizations where there may be, it may sort of take a while to have that whole process approved. And then I would also say to ask your organization where you invest, where they invest, because it's also really important to look at your investments, not only where you bank.
Awesome, thank you, Emma. All right, we've got a question for Jackie. This is from Nazi. Jackie, what is next for Mazaska Talks? And how do you see this Indigenous-led divestment movement engaging with the student divestment movement, with BankExit, and other overlapping movements?
What's next is stopping line 3 and the other 2 pipelines that we're focused on. So any bank that's behind that, we are working with partners like Sierra Club, Rainforest Action Network, and BankTrack to push those banks to stop financing and walk away from pipelines, LNG, Arctic drilling, fracking, as BNP did altogether. For us, that means spreading the municipal divestment campaign. It means strengthening relationships across the world with impacted communities and learning how we can support them as well. It's really building alliances. And the 3 days of action with more than 45 actions registered across the world. Here in Seattle, we had visits to and shutdowns of 106 bank branches. And this is all possible because of relationships. So we're going to grow our relationships and hopefully do a much bigger kind of a similar event around a global action. This is not going to end anytime soon. So there are still millions, billions of people that don't know about our message, don't know about the banks, and there's always more to do on the city level. There's lots to do, especially divesting universities, tribes, etc. And we just need to have many more people like us out there doing that work. So building capacity of other people, making this information accessible, making this knowledge around organizing accessible, and just spreading it like wildfire.
Thanks, Jackie. We've got a couple questions about credit unions. So I can actually field some of those since I work at a credit union. I think there were some questions about accessing ATMs outside of the particular locality of the credit union. And actually, there's a really great network. It's a little known resource. I think it's the best kept secret of the credit unions space out there, but it's called the Co-op Network. And if you go to coopcreditunions.org, you can access it. And basically, it's a shared ATM service and bank and product services that credit unions that are part of this network share. And there's hundreds across the country. So if you're a member of one credit union that's a member of the Co-op Network, you can access ATMs and shared branch services at other credit unions across the country. So I've used it as a member of the credit union. I'm a part of Self-Help Federal Credit Union, and I've been able to go to virtually any state in the country, I think every state in the country, and access ATMs and shared branch services for free with my credit union membership. So again, that's co-op creditunions.org. And that's the co-op network of credit unions and shared branch and ATM services. There was also a question about international accessibility. How do I access my money in a credit union if I go abroad? So that really depends on the credit union, whether you can access your dollars and not be charged a fee when you go abroad. But most debit cards for credit unions work in ATMs abroad, just like with your bank. You may just be assessed a fee, and it depends on the credit union that you're with, whether or not you'd be assessed a fee. And that would be something you should ask when you're considering joining a credit union if you do have a lot of international travel. But most credit unions that I know, at least when you have a debit card with them, you can access dollars abroad. I'm not sure what the fees look like, so you'd have to ask your particular credit union about that. So I think there's one more. We've got about 3 more minutes. And there's another one for Jackie. So the question is, Does Mazaska Talk see a special role for Native American-owned lead banks in the Divest the Globe movement? Any examples of the role they are playing in this movement?
Yeah, there are Native American-owned banks. I think one of them is called Native American Bank, and several tribes also have banks of their own. It would be awesome if cities could transfer their money to Native American banks, but there's often requirements around where cities can actually take their money, and often they can't take it out of the city. So, for example, Wells Fargo, if they had a branch in Seattle, that would be considered being in the community. And to that extent, it's not really possible for these major cities to support Native American-owned banks. And it would be awesome if that would happen. And we're definitely looking into how to get tribes to divest and move away from Wall Street themselves. But for now, there's lots of tricky things around city and state laws with safety of the money and supporting the community.
Jackie, is there a resource people can go to learn more about Native American-owned banks?
There is a list of banks in an article on Last Real Indians. And I think if you just Google Last Real Indians tribal banks or tribe banks, you'll be able to find it. And in that article, you have a list of, this is borrowed, I think, from Indian Country Media Network. And they had an article about Native-owned banks. I'm confident that if you Google that, you can find that information.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, we've got one more question for Jackie before we wrap up here. So the question is, would you recommend that non-native allies try to talk to various natives or indigenous tribes within an area to obtain advice on how to put on a bank action or what to do if they want to put on a bank action?
It's very likely that the tribes in a certain area or a tribe in a given area is having some sort of tension with the federal government. Every tribe is different, and it may not be a water issue, but it could be a coal mining project. It could be fracking. It could be sacred sites desecration. So I would say, yeah, of course, reach out to people, but you know, not every single Indian person is the same, and we're not a monolith. So sometimes we disagree, and it would definitely behoove everyone to find out which territories they're on, because they're likely on some indigenous territory. And I think that we definitely need to build alliances, and that it's incumbent upon non-native allies to become educated themselves before approaching indigenous communities, and educating themselves to the furthest extent possible before asking questions. But I think in general, it's a good measure to reach out to indigenous communities where you are.
Great, thanks so much. So I think that wraps it up for us. We wanted to end you on time, even though we started a bit late. Again, our apologies about starting late. But you can please feel free to reach out to any of us by getting in touch with Mike or Sachi with the New Economy Coalition. And we're all happy to continue engaging in this conversation. And hopefully you all learned something concrete that you can do today to take action on divesting your own money, a nonprofit or religious institution's money that you're affiliated with, and even your city, and engaging a campaign to get your city to divest from their big Wall Street bank. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to the panelists, Jackie and Emma, for your time today and your wisdom. And have a great day, everyone. Thanks so much again for joining.
Thank you. Take care.